I'm Shelly Palmer.
I'm Ross Martin.
And you're listening to Think About This.
Today we're talking about hate with Jonathan Greenblatt from the ADL. So welcome to Think About This.
The more you listen,
the less you know.
Hey, Ross.
Hey, Shelly. This is a very serious episode. So
this is actually one of the most serious episodes we're ever going to do, and it's a serious topic for a serious time. First of all, are you safe and are you sound?
I'm safe. I don't know if I'm sound. Yeah. And the sound quality may not be good, but I'm safe. How about you?
No, we're great. We're great. Where are you? You're up in Maine?
I'm in Maine. I'm here. 8 grown-ups, 3 dogs, and a hedgehog here in my house. What about you?
Yeah, we don't have any hedgehogs, just my little cat, Lady Macintosh, and I've got the whole family up here. We're in Vermont, and we are all safe and sound, and I'm very happy about that. So today we've got Jonathan Greenblatt, who is the CEO of the ADL, and the Anti-Defamation League has had its hands full over the last few years. It shouldn't surprise anybody that hate, bias crimes, hate crimes, anti-Semitism writ large, bullying, cyberbullying, all of this is through the roof over the last few years. And the ADL has literally had its hands full just trying to deal with it. That's the thrust of the organization's charter is to...
Well, yeah, and then now more than ever, we're seeing it in a whole new way. As we isolate in place, we all go to our homes and we try to not get infected with the coronavirus, and we're all pointing fingers at somebody. Is it the administration's fault? Is it our local or state officials' fault? Or is it the fault of the Chinese? And so all of a sudden we have a whole slew of new enemies. And by the way, the Jews are being blamed for coronavirus too.
Which is nuts. I was out walking the other day, and there are several families that live in and around where I am, and everybody's being very respectful. I saw someone who I knew out walking a day or so ago, and the person screamed out, "If you're a friend, stay away. If you're a foe, approach and die." I'm like, oh, really? Jeez, okay.
See, this is exactly the thing.
Nuts.
I think that coronavirus has brought us in some ways further apart and in some ways closer together. And that's what we should explore with Jonathan on the show.
Let's bring him in. Jonathan Greenblatt, how are you?
Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Shelly. Thank you, gentlemen, for having me today.
Jonathan, where are you?
I'm just outside New York City.
Oh, excellent. And you're safe and everybody's safe?
Thank goodness we're all safe and the family is good. So feeling healthy and fortunate on this morning.
Yeah, as are we all. As are we all.
I'm actually drinking Jonathan's water, if you can believe it.
Bravo.
And I'm not doing it to kiss butt, but he's the creator, the co-creator of Ethos Water, which you get at Starbucks. And it's one of the only bottled waters I was able to find around here today.
Wow.
But Jonathan started that. I don't think everyone knows that. I mean, he runs the ADL, but he also is the creator of Ethos Water.
Jonathan, tell us about that.
Yeah, in an earlier life, I was a brand guy, and my roommate from business school and I started this company that was basically founded on a very simple idea. You know, bottled water is about a $15-20 billion consumer products category and sort of utterly unnecessary and frivolous. And yet there's about 1 billion people around the world who lack clean drinking water. So we thought, let's create a premium bottle of water and then use the profits or a portion of the profits to help children around the world get clean water.
So my unnecessary frivolity is actually helping kids around the world.
Exactly right. So we converted you. You didn't even know it. We converted you from a consumer into an activist.
That's fantastic. You know, Jonathan, that history says a lot about you and how you think, and of course your current charge, which is the Anti-Defamation League or the ADL. You guys have been busy since, forever, yeah. But certainly in the last couple of years, it's gotten crazy. What do you make of it?
It's really something. So the ADL was founded 107 years ago, in the turn of the 20th century, at a time when Jews in this country lived very differently than today. They were routinely discriminated against, kept out of universities, prevented from entering numerous professions, denied the right to buy homes where they wanted, work where they chose, etc. And around the time when a Jewish man was lynched falsely accused of a crime and hung from a tree by a mob, the ADL was created. And the organization was founded with a very simple mission. Literally, the words were written in a sort of charter that the founders drafted that we still use today as our mission statement, that our purpose is to, quote, stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment to all. So that has always been our mission. What's fascinating, if you will, in a sort of maybe a gruesome kind of way, is that whereas anti-Semitism had been on the decline for many, many years, in fact, as you alluded to, Shelly, perversely, we've seen anti-Semitism on the rise in just the past 4 years.
Yes.
So whereas, again, we track acts of harassment and vandalism and violence, and we've been doing that for decades and decades. And again, they were on the decline. In 2016, the numbers jumped 34%, which was very significant. In 2017, the numbers spiked 57%.
Oh my.
The largest single year increase we've ever seen. In 2018, and that was the second highest total. In 2018, while the numbers dipped slightly, about 5%, it was still the third highest total. And in fact, the number of assaults more than doubled year over year. And now we're putting the finishing touches on the numbers for 2019. And whereas we don't totally know yet, we collect this information through our 25 offices around the country, I can tell you that 2019 featured the shooting attack in San Diego. It featured the brazen assaults in Brooklyn. It featured the attack on the supermarket in Jersey City. It featured the stabbing in Muncie, New York. So we're in a very peculiar place where Jews live with so much privilege in this country. And we've achieved in so many ways, and yet the vulnerability is remarkable and the danger is real.
How do you actually measure your success? How do you know if, as the leader of the ADL, you're doing a good job or not?
Such a great question, Ross. I'll tell you, I've been in the role now for just under 5 years. And when I initially got a call from a headhunter about the job, my first thought was, like, why are you calling me? Like, I've never run a nonprofit. I'm never worked in a Jewish community. And frankly, like, ADL is a civil rights organization that has been involved in enormous historic cases over its 100 plus years. Brown versus Board of Education, lots of big cases. I'm not even a lawyer. Like, I'm an MBA. I'm a brand guy. I know how to build businesses. So what I've tried to do at ADL is to bring what I learned in business to this body of work. And so in some ways, the way I measure my success, like right off the bat, I think all the time about revenue, margin, and share. Am I growing the top line? Am I managing my expenses? And am I building share in the markets that we serve? And when I say the markets that we serve, ADL has 3 lines of business. We do advocacy, education, and work with law enforcement. So we do advocacy. We try to change laws in the courts or in Congress or at the state or local level in order to protect minorities and preserve the rights enshrined in the First Amendment. Secondly, we do anti-bias education. So we are very focused on this idea that you can't stop hate. You can't arrest your way out of hate. You can't legislate your way out of hate. You have to change hearts and minds. So today we're one of the largest providers in the country of anti-bias content in schools. We reach about 1.5 million kids. And then thirdly, we work with law enforcement. We help them track hate crimes. I just mentioned some of that. We help investigate the extremists. We have a whole research unit that investigates extremists of all types. And then we train. We're the largest trainer of law enforcement in the United States on issues of extremism and hate. We train like 15,000 officers every year. So how do I measure success? Number one, am I increasing the top line? Am I managing my expenses? And am I growing share in those markets? And so for what it's worth, when I started at ADL, we did about 42 million in revenue. Last year, we were about almost 71 million. So we've grown the revenue dramatically. We're now in the black every year, finishing with a bit of a surplus. And then finally, we're expanding the reach of our anti-bias programs and of our law enforcement training. So those are good metrics that tell me that at the ground level, we're executing to plan.
That's a great answer, by the way.
That's how I think about it. And then on the other side, I think, Ross, a lot about, well, are we actually creating the change we want to see in the world? So we are constantly running surveys to determine, do analyses, do our anti-bias education programs to actually reduce bias in a school? Do the law enforcement officers we train now report hate crimes effectively? Do the advocacy efforts that we drive actually change the issue at hand? Like we just about to get a law signed in Washington State on cyber hate. We're at the top level looking at the economics and the kind of product numbers, and then also trying to think, are we creating the social impact we want to see?
So that's the important part to me, Jonathan, because the health of the ADL financially, of course, you can't do anything if you guys don't have the appropriate funding and investment behind you. But this is about cultural change as much as it's about anything. And as you said, hearts and minds need to be changed. And ignorance is the breeding ground for hate. And also, the more strife and the more desperate people are, and the more hopeless they are, the more they're looking for something or someone to blame. And as we know, populist politics always tends to pick an enemy and harp on it. In this case, it's become institutionalized. It's become okay in the last 4 years to be a little brazen. And I'm wondering, have these sentiments ever really gone away, or did it just become politically incorrect to express them? And then once given permission, it just reared its head? Or was there some other driving factor? And I'm not even trying to be political about it. I'm really trying to understand because I know the stats that you published at ADL since 2016, and the numbers are striking. And it's not just over-reporting or better measurement. These are real changes, and you feel it. It's palpable. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there are a few things going on. So, like to your point, Shelly, like anti-Semitism certainly isn't new. It's been described as, quote, the oldest hatred. And it's really been a persistent part of the human condition for thousands of years. Jews, because they've lived in diaspora, again, literally for thousands of years, but retain their own religion, their own language, their own culture, they existed as a minority in much larger societies. And as you said, were therefore often very convenient scapegoats when something went wrong and when people needed someone to blame for something that they couldn't explain or understand. You know, that's pretty much how it worked. In the United States, I think it's safe to say this is, I believe, in my experience, the most extraordinary place for the Jewish people in those thousands of years, other than the state of Israel, where Jewish people live in their own sovereign country. America has afforded Jews so many opportunities, so many rights. It's beyond remarkable. I mean, think about it right now. Whether you like him or not, Donald Trump has a Jewish child. And there are Jewish grandchildren literally in the White House, in the residence of the White House. It's remarkable.
Yeah.
You know, the Holocaust, which was this horrific and sort of singular human tragedy, was really like nothing else in history. And it created a kind of collective guilt that lasted in much of the world for 50, 60, 70 years.
Yeah.
But we're now living in a moment where most of those Holocaust survivors have passed away.
Yes.
And so the collective guilt that was once there.
Aren't you yourself the grandson of a Holocaust survivor?
Yes. My grandfather lived through Nazi Germany and the persecution and all the horrible stuff. Yep. Indeed, most of the survivors are now gone. So I think the collective guilt has dissipated. And then I think there are three things driving it today right now. Number one, indeed, we have political leadership that has allowed anti-Semitism to gallop, from the margins right into the mainstream. And you see this in so many different ways. Again, whether you like President Trump or you don't like President Trump really isn't the issue for me. But when you use language like globalists, talk about open borders, constantly deride George Soros as if he were behind all these conspiracies, when you credential white supremacist media into the press briefing room, or you invite them to cover delegations to Davos. Like, there's no precedent for this. And normalizing that kind of anti-Semitism is horrifying. I would say, for what it's worth, that we have, this extremism, and I'm referring right now to the kind of right-wing, far-right extremism. Mm-hmm. There's also kind of a radical left-wing extremism that might not demonize the Jewish people, but demonizes the Jewish state, with many of the same myths and tropes that have been used to delegitimize Jews for, again, thousands of years. So those people as well don't belong in the mainstream, but somehow you see them being feted about on Capitol Hill, and you see them increasingly visible in college campuses. And that creates, it's a bit of a mirror image of the alt-right, but nonetheless it's a problem. So number one, I think
there's no question about it. I don't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to couch this in a slightly different context. I hear you loud and clear. The left and the right, both, the extremes on both sides, both have their place in this particular problem. To win a Twitter war, you take a subtle subject, you make it binary, mm-hmm. you choose the wrong side of it, and you scream at it loud, and you will win by the numbers. Nothing in the middle survives. No sober, thoughtful explanation wins. It's always howling at the moon, screaming on both sides. We see that these extreme positions, and they're the loudest and the noisiest because of the nature of social media. Is it fair to say that these extreme positions feel more mainstream even though they aren't? Or is it, perception being reality, they feel mainstream, therefore they are, quote, they are the mainstream, these extreme positions? Like, this is the thing I've been struggling with personally.
It's a good question, Shelly, and it's a nuanced question. Well, it's a complex question with a nuanced answer. So I think, as it were, both things are true. So number one, I think, indeed, the screaming on social media, and if you ask me the second thing driving this, social media has a lot to do with why anti-Semitism is on the rise, because it's become a kind of echo chamber that amplifies the worst voices.
Yes.
And indeed, you can scream in a way and say things that you could never say before, ever.
Right.
You couldn't, everyone can't post an op-ed in the New York Times or put something out on, broadcast television or on the radio. But now, again, with social media, you post something on Facebook and the world can see it. You post a video on YouTube and the world can see it. Mm-hmm. So it's created, there are no barriers to entry, which in some ways is good, but on the other hand, let's acknowledge that editorial processes and ombudsmen and some degree of discretion was actually, a little bit of friction is actually helpful if you want to have a civil conversation and an informed kind of body politic. So on the one hand, you're right. The screaming is so loud, it's kind of barged its way into the mainstream because it seems to dominate the news cycle. Like we were talking about coronavirus and how these flus, how these viruses jump from the animal population to the human population. Mm-hmm. Well, you see hate jump from social media into kind of into like the public conversation. Again, like some aberrant virus that suddenly goes from the bat population to people. The aberrant virus of hate goes from 4chan to Twitter to NBC Nightly News.
Yeah.
So there's that. But the other thing that's also happened that we need to keep in mind is because leaders haven't called it out, because they've actually tried to appropriate the hate and use it for political advantage, it's legitimized some of these voices. And that's sort of a calamity and something we're going to be dealing with, I'm afraid, for a long time.
So that brings me to this. People seem to be more human in isolation than they were in normal circumstances. The best of people seems to be coming out right now, this moment. It's just amazing to me. And I'm wondering, have you at the ADL seen in the last little bit some humanization of the world or some...
Wait, Shelly, before he responds to that, Jonathan, I think I'm seeing what you're seeing, Shelly, but also the opposite as well, which is that, yes, people are coming together, families are closer, and it's bringing out the best in so many people. It's also the case that we are all rallying around different enemies to hate. and whether that's the federal government, your state or local government, or the Chinese, we've decided that we do need an enemy here. We do need to blame someone for coronavirus, and we're not going to stop until someone takes the blame. And so like, I don't think anything's changed at all.
So I think, there's truth in both of what you're saying. So first, I'll take Ross's point. We have absolutely been tracking a very worrying spike in xenophobia around coronavirus.
Wow.
From the president repeatedly and insistently referring to it not by the WHO name of COVID-19, not by the early kind of terminology used by medical professionals, coronavirus, but referring to it as the Chinese virus. Or someone else on White House staff calling it the, quote, Kung flu.
Oh, no.
I mean, these are terms that clearly alienate Asian Americans.
Yes.
And when I say they alienate them, we are seeing people get assaulted in the street, getting harassed online because of the fact that they're perceived, because they're wearing masks and they're Asian, or they're perceived to be of Chinese ethnicity, and somehow people think they're carrying the disease or bringing the disease into the country. So we've been working with a bunch of different Asian American groups and members of Congress. I wrote an op-ed in the USA Today with Andrew Yang about this last week. Like, this is a real issue where Asian Americans are feeling scared, and with good reason. By the way, I'll just say, there's also been a fair amount of anti-Semitism around this, because once again, Jews are easy to blame, from the white supremacists saying that it's the Jews designed the coronavirus.
Great.
Or the Jews already have a vaccine, but they're trying to profit off of it.
Oh, my.
It goes on and on. It's like a modern version of the blood libel against Jews. By the way, there are also some in the Middle East, like in Iran and Turkey, and even here, suggesting that Israel is behind the coronavirus, that Israel is trying to weaponize it against Palestinians. I mean, more crazy stuff. So I think, to Ross's point, the xenophobia and anti-Semitism is real, and it's worrying. I will also say that indeed I have heard story after story after story about people checking in on elderly neighbors, about people baking bread and sharing it with the neighborhood, about people reaching out in ways they hadn't in years to friends and former colleagues to see how they're doing. So there have been some very hopeful signs that give me some degree of encouragement that maybe, just maybe, this too shall pass.
Hey, John, that's outstanding. Really, what a wonderful, wonderful interview. I can't thank you enough.
Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on the show. What you're doing is more important than ever.
It's kind of neat to say. Thank you guys for giving me the opportunity, and I hope you both keep healthy and stay safe.
Shelly, you know the ADL much better than I do. You're on one of the advisory boards, and I just hear about the work that they do and the responsibility that they've taken to sort of fight hate everywhere they see it. But what I didn't know, I didn't know anything about Jonathan. First of all, this is the guy that co-founded Ethos Water at Starbucks, which Starbucks acquired. Then he was a senior executive at Starbucks. Mm-hmm. He's also the grandson of a Holocaust survivor.
Yes.
And he's such an unlikely, as he said it, an unlikely choice in some ways to succeed Abe Foxman, the longtime head of the ADL. But in other ways, he's the perfect choice because he's running it like an incredibly efficient and effective business, with measuring his success by not just social impact, but by the impact that the business can have on systems, in this country and abroad.
He's done a really good job. Abe Foxman was legendary, and this was an interesting transition and passing of the torch. I think Jonathan's been a very good leader.
Yeah.
The organization has so much work to do,
yeah.
And the charter started as an organization that was to fight anti-Semitism at a time when anti-Semitism was rampant. It had kind of, as we discussed, gone away for the better part of half a century, and now it's back, maybe not as virulent as before. Some people say more virulent.
Well, here's the thing. I didn't know a quarter of the things that they're actually doing. I thought, and I think most people, when they think about the ADL, that if you said something bad about Jewish people or you had an off-color joke, then you'd get a call from the ADL and they'd be like, you can't do that.
So Ross, as you know, I'm on the Consumer Technology Board for the ADL, and that's the Anti-Defamation League does so many more things than just anti-Semitism. So yes, you're right. Back in the day, it was about defending Jews who are victims of anti-Semitism. But today, the ADL has programs about cyberbullying, about bias of every kind, hate crimes. They train law enforcement. They train educators. There's a wealth of online educational tools to have workshops and bring people together in ways that they hadn't been in the past. So the ADL has just a giant range of things that they try to do to help change the conversation. And again, they've got an uphill battle because mostly what they're dealing with is ignorance. People just, they hate because they don't have a better thing to do. So they have to give you another way to think about your problems or your issues. And
that's right.
And it's one thing if you have an argument with somebody, it's like, oh, I hate Ross. He owes me $50. It's something else if it's Ross, that blanking Jew, or worse. Nowadays, I don't know if it's worse. Nowadays, it can be different because on social media, kids will just go at each other in ways that they would never have gone at each other in person. And the suicide rates with young children are up, as you know, through social media bullying and bullying of all kinds, but exacerbated and amplified by social. The ADL spends a lot of time.
They do.
Trying to help with that. So they've got a wide range of programs. And I'm very proud to be part of that organization. I'm very proud to help them raise the funds to do the work that they do. I just wish there wasn't so much work to do.
Yeah, me too. I don't want to think about that, but I think we have no choice.
Yeah.
We want to say thank you to everyone who is listening to our podcast and giving us feedback. We really appreciate everything we're hearing from you. And most of all, we appreciate hearing that you are home, that you are healthy and safe, and that you are not losing faith that we will somehow come through this and be stronger for it. Thank you, everyone.
Westwood One Podcast Network.